Hi, I'm Martin, and today I'm really excited to be talking to you guys about this book I just finished reading, Greenlights by Matthew McConaughey. This is an autobiography that was just released, and I don't know how much you guys know about Matthew. To be honest, I don't know much about him myself. In fact, I haven't seen most of his really popular movies. I've only seen Interstellar and the one bit in The Wolf of Wall Street where he's doing the humming. And I thought those movies were all right. I really liked Interstellar, mostly because of the ideas, and I think his acting was good, but it wasn't anything that made me really care much about Matthew. But his Oscar acceptance speech was something I really admired, where he's basically talking about himself being his own hero, but himself down the road 10 years, and how he'll never reach that hero. He's always going to be chasing him. And also, I found it intriguing that he's deciding to make himself his own hero. And so, that being the only context I had to who is Matthew McConaughey, I was really excited to pick this book up, mostly because of its title, Greenlights, as we'll get into the meaning, but basically moments in your life where you can pursue something, you get kind of a green light, you want to go after something, and life is kind of allowing you to do that. And that's mostly what this book is about. So the book is an autobiography. It's called Greenlights because this is something that Matthew finds very important in his life. And his explanation of what a green light is basically a moment or a time in your life where you have the opportunity in front of you. Life is oriented in such a way that it's giving you a pass. It's telling you to go ahead. And one thing that he stresses throughout the book is that finding green lights, looking for them, and timing them are all skills. And these are skills that we build upon throughout our life. So the book is organized into about 8 main chapters, each of which have their own kind of meaning in terms of where he was at in his life and kind of the lesson he took away from it. Some stood out to me more than others. Overall, I really, really enjoyed this book, mostly because Matthew has a lot of really interesting stories that he's collected from 35 years of journaling. And another reason I found this book really interesting is because it's mostly based off of the journals that he's been taking for the past 35 years. Myself, I journal, and I find a lot of value in it for myself. And I thought it'd be very interesting to hear what Matthew has to say about his entire life and his value of journaling, and dig up some stories from his journals. Matthew starts the book off by giving an insight into the family that he was raised in. His parents married 3 times and divorced twice, ending off on the marriage. They were very outwardly loving, honest, and rowdy. He had 2 older brothers, one of which was adopted. And to give a picture of what the family life was like, the start of the book opens up with a conflict that the mom and dad are having. And it gets kind of physical to the point where the mom grabs a knife. They've both pushed each other. The dad is bleeding a little bit. And they're continuing this fight. And as the reader, when you're first reading it, you have no idea whether this is some kind of horror story, like this is actually something tragic that happened, or this is just kind of the usual rough housing that goes on in a house. Luckily, the conflict ends. Well, I don't know if it's so lucky for the kids, but the conflict ends with the mom and dad literally making love on the kitchen floor with like their sons just watching the whole thing go down. So that, as an intro into their family life, reveals the sort of honest, rowdy, kind of highly emotional family that they were raised in. Matthew was raised in a type of family that didn't punish him for doing something wrong, but rather they punished him for getting caught. And we see this theme in the very first chapter of the book as it's titled Outlaw Logic. This is basically the sort of values that his family had raised him and his brothers with. Again, don't get caught for doing something bad. you got to follow the rules until you're kind of brave enough to break them. And I guess that sort of logic where you can be an outlaw, but you have to own it. Whatever you do, you have to own it. Whether it's something bad, you can't be kind of halfway in or halfway out. You have to be fully 10 toes down when you actually commit to something. Matthew's mom also bred a lot of self-esteem in him. When he was about 8 years old, he won a Little Mr. Texas competition, which is basically you put on a costume of like some cowboy. It's kind of like a pageant. And he had been told by his mom historically, you know, as he got older, that he'd always won that. And then he zoomed in on a photo and it actually said runner up. And his mom just decided that he won because the kid that actually won came from a very rich family, had the nicest cowboy costume on, and for that reason won. And in his mom's eyes, that was cheating. And so Matthew had actually won that. Matthew makes a point of talking about the 4 times he got an ass whooping from his parents. One time was for responding to Matt in the schoolyard because somebody called him Matt instead of Matthew, and his mom didn't name him after a doormat, so she beat his ass for it. Another time was saying, I hate you to his brother. Another time was saying, I can't. And the final time he got an ass whooping was for telling his dad a lie about a stolen pizza. In high school, Matthew was a very popular, very handsome dude who was dating the best looking girl in school and had his own car, was good socially, basically kind of, you know, what every teenager maybe aspires to be. In his senior year, Matthew won the most handsome award, was dating the best looking girl, had his own car, fully paid out, and upon graduating, he didn't really know what he wanted to do. So he decided to go to Australia. You know, his rationale was, I'll hang out at the beaches, I'll party with the people down in Sydney, you know, in the big city. I'll have a lot of fun, kind of like a 5th year of high school. It should be fun. But then when he moved there, things weren't exactly the way he panned them out to be. To keep it brief, Matthew moved into a family that lived very, very far away from the actual city, downtown. They lived in a tiny, tiny town. During this phase in his life, about the year that he was staying in Sydney, he got very, very introspective and had to basically deal a lot with himself because he wasn't able to do the things that he wanted to. The family that he lived with were a little bit authoritarian. Like by the end of it, the dad wanted them to do certain things that Matthew wasn't comfortable with. And at first, Matthew was thinking, okay, these are just cultural differences. I will oblige and try my best. But towards the end of it, he had enough of it. He said, fuck it, I'm going to go, I'm going to leave. With just a few months remaining in the year that he committed to live in Australia for a year, he decided to move out of the house that he was staying at because he couldn't put up with the family anymore. And he stayed the rest of the time with a different family that had asked him how he had put up with that crazy family for so long. During this time, Matthew becomes very introspective. He finds himself, finds his frequency, as the chapter is called, and basically has to switch between, being an extrovert back in America, living a dream life, having a car, doing whatever he wants, being very socially accepted, versus coming to Australia, not really liking the school that he was going to. So he dropped out, started taking these sort of internships, and ended up working a few jobs while in Australia. Upon returning from his year-long trip in Australia, Matthew came back to a car that was fully paid off, a valid driver's license that he could use. He was of drinking age now, basically able to do anything that he wanted to. He had no curfew now either. And back in Australia, he was thinking about what he wanted to do with the rest of his life. And so he started applying to colleges. And his whole life, he was kind of growing up to think that he was going to become a lawyer. And his family was in on that plan, and they were always hyping him up to become the family lawyer so they could sue people and get money, and for him to be a lawyer for his brother's businesses as well. But after enrolling and starting to study and going through basically a year of school, he decided that He doesn't really want to keep doing that. And one day when he was studying for his psychology exam, he was basically taking a break. He picked up a book. It was titled The Greatest Salesman in the World. And as he was kind of flipping through the book and reading a little bit, he realized that the book is actually talking to the reader. That is when he decided that he's going to stop lying to himself. He doesn't want to be a lawyer. He's a good storyteller. That's what he enjoys doing. He wants to tell stories. And that is when he decides to enroll in film school. He gives his dad a call, a very uncomfortable call, because basically the money that he had spent for his first year is now kind of wasted. He has to go and redo that in film school. So he made the change. He called his dad. His dad agreed, and he was on his way to a new step, a new direction in his life. Greenlight. This chapter in the book is called Dirt Roads and Autobahns, and this is a nod to Robert Frost's poem where he's talking about taking the path less traveled, the dirt road. What Matthew is talking about in this chapter is the idea that for some people, the Autobahn might be the path less traveled. If you're an introvert, then sometimes getting out there and becoming an extrovert is what will help you become a more rounded person and give you disproportionate value. And the same applies to the extrovert who needs to become more introverted. And the dirt road and the Autobahn is that same analogy. He ties this back into his trip to Australia, where he was leaving a very extroverted lifestyle and becoming a very introverted person during that year, and then coming back. And him coming back with that life experience really helped him make decisions further along in the path. One thing I really, really love about Matthew's book is that he includes a bunch of poetry and a bunch of raw notes that he's taken over the years. And honestly, I think some of them are really good. I want to limit myself to how many I recite during this book talk, because I think that would be quite boring, but I have to include at least a few. One of the poems that I really liked from this chapter is the following. DNA and work, genetics and willpower, life's a combination. Some get the genes, but never the work ethic or resilience. Others work their asses off, but never had the innate ability. Others have both and never rely on the first. I like this poem a lot because we've all heard of kind of the notion that some people have the right genetics, but then don't work hard, and then other people work really hard, but don't have the genetics to do something. And there's that one adage, it's like hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. But I really like this quote because Matthew includes this line about somebody who has both but never relies on the talent, never actually believes in themselves to go out and work hard to achieve something. And I thought that that was very profound. Matthew's very first role on film was in Dazed and Confused. And to be honest, I haven't seen the movie, but I went and Googled a clip where he's pulling up in that car and he goes, "All right, all right, all right." And that became his trademark thereafter. And that was something that wasn't scripted. He just decided to do that because he embodied the cool character that he was supposed to be. A little while after that role, he wasn't getting any new offers. His career wasn't growing as fast as he'd like it to. And that is when he reached out to this producer that he was staying at and basically told him, like, look, I kind of need a gig. I need a job. And then I need an opportunity. And the producer told him, like, no, you cannot have that mentality because this town, Hollywood, really smells needy. Like, if you need something, you will never get it. He told him to go on a trip, go do something fun. And that's exactly what Matthew did. He got a couple buddies. They went to Germany and basically rode motorcycles through Europe for like 2 months. And when he came back, he had so much good life experience. He enjoyed those 2 months or 6 weeks or whatever so much that he wasn't actually concerned with like needing this role. And exactly then is when he got the role. This brings me to another poem that I really liked in the book, and this one is called The Genies in the Steam. People wonder how to make it in life. First of kin with innate ability and a lot of hard work. Yes. But don't forget the steam. The undefined asterisk and intangible. Some call it juice. Some call it magic. The genie's in the magic. The magic's in the steam. I really enjoy this quote, and I'm not even sure I fully understand what it's talking about. Part of it, I think, relates to this idea that you almost have to believe you can do something when you want to do it. Another part, when I think of the steam, I'm thinking of the hard work. And I think what this, I'm thinking kind of out loud right now, but what I think the poem is trying to put together is you need the belief as well as the hard work to actually achieve something. Hence, the magic is in the steam and the genie's in the steam. Matthew also wrote a poem titled Dirt Roads and Autobahns, which is the name of this chapter. So I thought I'd recite it here just to kind of summarize his point. The road less traveled may not be a dirt road. For some, it may be the Autobahn. Robert Frost was right. Taking the road less traveled can make all the difference. But that road isn't necessarily the road with the least traffic. It may be the road that we, personally, have traveled less. The introvert may need to get out of the house, engage with the world, get public. The extrovert may need to stay at home and read a book. Sometimes we need to get out there. Sometimes we need to get in there. Some days our road less traveled is a solitary dirt trail. On others, it's the subway on the 7 line. This next chapter I enjoyed a lot, and it's called The Art of Running Downhill. It's a pretty clever name once you think about it. The art of running downhill is basically when you're running downhill, it's easier to run because you're not fighting gravity, so you have to push less. But it's also easy to trip yourself and fall because you might start running too fast for your legs to keep up and you'll face plant. Now, he gets a little deeper into this. So before I go ahead, I want to explain kind of, what this moment in his life stems from. This is basically when he gains a lot of success after his movie A Time to Kill. And overnight, once that movie goes public, he literally becomes famous. He goes from being able to walk down the street and 2 people recognizing him to everybody on the street recognizing him and 2 people not knowing who he is. He went from having 100 applications, auditions that he had done, and only 1 yes coming through to now, overnight, there's 99 yeses coming through and 1 no. After becoming famous overnight, he was basically able to pursue any of the opportunities that before he'd only dreamed of actually pursuing. So now the 1 offer that he had gotten turned to 99, and it was very important for him to choose wisely and not trip himself running downhill. The downhill being that he now had every opportunity that he ever wanted, and the trick now is to actually choose properly. Which brings me to another poem of his that I really liked. This one is titled The Art of Running Downhill. The art of running downhill. Don't trip yourself while running downhill. That mountain you want to climb is just around a corner. Don't invent drama. It will come on its own. I really like this poem because he's not only talking about tripping yourself while you're running downhill, but he's also talking about the undeserving complex that you might gain or that you might get once you actually achieve success. So once success is achieved, you will now have a bunch more opportunities that you want to pursue, and you'll be thinking, well, maybe I don't deserve all of this. And that is the drama that you're inventing while having all of these opportunities. And he's saying, don't do that. Don't start thinking about how undeserving you are of these opportunities. Don't start thinking about how easy it is. Instead, do what you need to do. Focus on what you want to do. Choose wisely. Be very conscious of the fact that you're now able to choose from a bunch of these things that you want to do and that you didn't have the opportunity to do before. Just think about the harder times that are ahead, because nothing is going to stay this easy. Even if you have an easy moment now, there will for sure be a hardship that's just around the corner. And so think about preparing for that rather than judging yourself and creating this drama around the success that you're having currently. It'll only impede you from making the right decisions. This is when Matthew takes a step back from his life. He decides that he needs some clarity. He goes to New Mexico to the Monastery of Christ and spends some time with the Christian brothers there, talking about his life, venting it out, hearing them as well. And basically, after a couple weeks of that, he returned. He was a new man. He was much more firmly grounded than he was before, and he was able to make correct decisions thereafter. Then Matthew had his wet dream. And there's 3 of these in the book. Each of these wet dreams have led him down these very interesting paths in his life. And, it's almost a bit prophetic. The first one is the same as the second one. And it's basically he's floating naked, kind of coasting on the Amazon River. And he sees these African tribesmen on a ridge up ahead. And then the dream ends, climaxes perhaps, and he awakens. And to him, this was a message of, okay, now I need to go and visit Africa because that's where the Amazon River is, right? But no, it turns out the Amazon River is in South America, and the African tribesmen were there for, I guess, no good reason for now. So he ends up going to the Amazon. He backpacks there for like 6 weeks, a good while. He spends a lot of time with himself. He is enjoying this path of seeing what he wants to do and then going ahead and doing it. And his backpacking trip was a success. Upon returning, he decided that he wanted to buy a trailer and be able to take it anywhere he goes. So he pimped it out all nice. He was able to live in it for a good while. And he was basically traveling across the states, doing whatever he wanted, taking meetings. He even started his own recording company during this time. And he was doing a bunch of journaling via audio form. Then the same wet dream repeated. And this time he was able to confirm that he was in fact on the Amazon River, which is in South America, and that African tribesmen were on the ridge up ahead. And having gone to one continent, he now decided to go to the other continent. He wanted to go do some backpacking in Africa. And so he packed his bags, went to Mali, met a local kind of guy that was going to take him and introduce him to the village. And he basically stayed with the village for a good little while. To keep his anonymity, he basically said that he was a boxer. And then one day, a local villager, the wrestling champion of the village, decided to challenge him to do some wrestling. And when I was reading this, I was kind of terrified. I'm like, oh no, like maybe Matthew might, get himself in a tricky situation here. But it ended up being a very positive experience. One thing that Matthew said is that if he declined the challenge, he would regret it his entire life. So in the moment, he accepted the challenge, and him and the wrestling champion of the village wrestled it out for 20 or 30 minutes. They're both super exhausted. It all ended in applause from all the onlookers, and both of them were congratulated for their participation. That wrestler and Matthew later became friends, and as he was talking to the local guide, he was asking why all the villagers were cheering, and it's basically because Matthew took the challenge instead of cowering away from it, which had made all the difference. Throughout the book, there are bumper stickers everywhere. Matthew's a big fan of them because they embody a good bit of meaning in a very concise form. Sometimes making a decision and committing to it is more important than the decision itself. And this is tied back to the decision that Matthew made to go visit South America and visit Africa. Even though it was on the basis of a wet dream, which may not be a great basis to go and decide to do a trip, the fact that he made that decision to go on that trip led him to such positive experiences that he probably wouldn't have gotten otherwise. And in fact, even if he had decided to go, not on the basis of a wet dream, it likely still would have resulted in the same impact. So the important part here is the fact that he made the decision to go, not why he made the decision to go. It's at this moment in Matthew's life that he realizes that his life is so much more full, so much more emotional, so much more vivid than the characters that he's playing in the movies, that he decides that he wants to make a switch in terms of the characters that he's actually playing. He doesn't feel fulfilled doing those characters, and he thinks it's a shame that his own life is so much more exciting, so much more meaningful, and so much more fulfilling than the characters that he's playing in the movies. Up to this moment, he was known as this rom-com guy because he did so many romantic comedies, and it was his decision to go and do a more meaningful, more dramatic, more involved role that was a better representation of his actual life in terms of meaning and fulfillment. So Matthew decided he didn't want to do any more romantic comedies. No other film that portrayed him as this just kind of sexy guy that didn't have a lot of meaning to it. He wanted to do a dramatic role. And he basically started saying no to any of the offers he was getting unless they fit that description. And it ended up getting to the point where for 20 months, he did no acting gigs at all. And for the last 12 of those months, he wasn't even getting any offers at all. Like, forget romantic comedy type offers. He ended up turning down, like, the highest bid was like $15 million for this one specific role. And he just said, look, I'm sorry, I'm not doing it. And that 20-month gap where he wasn't doing any acting was a big concern for him because, first of all, he wasn't used to saying no. Like, before, he would do anything that he was ever asked to do, and it just so happened that most of the time they were romantic comedies. As well as there was a big pay decline from not acting, obviously. But after 20 months, he finally ended up starting to get some offers that weren't of the romantic comedy type. And what's important to mention here is that at first he was branded as this romantic comedy guy because all of the movies that he did before were of that nature. And it was a hard decision for him to say no for 20 months to anything. But what that allowed him to do in the end was basically unbrand himself from the guy who does romantic comedies. And that opened the doors to him to do much more involved roles that he wanted to do. That is when he got 3 offers for 3 movies that he really wanted to do: Paperboy, Magic Mike, and Mud. He wrote another poem describing this time in his life, and it is the following: Selfish. When I'm rich enough not to care about the money. When the child's life is more important than my own. When my self-worth isn't reliant on the adulation of others. When I don't care anymore to outscore my desires. I look near and within and get selfish. This is the measure of a man's greatness. When a man becomes classic. When mortal rewards are no longer enough to pay his rent. Man becomes legend. Fish for yourself. Self-ish. This Matthew McConaughey renaissance became what allowed him to actually pursue the roles that he wanted. This is when he did Dallas Buyers Club, a movie that he got very attached to the role and was borderline doing method acting for a little while. He had to drop from weighing 182 to 135 in like 6 months' time. And basically, he was very involved in that role. He got to truly know Ron, the character, to the point where he met his family and got like his diaries and really got a deep connection with this role and ended up gaining a lot of fulfillment from enacting the role with such accuracy. Nearing the present day, and after having done many roles that he found very vivid, very fulfilling, very full of life, he found that he had tipped the scale a little bit. The characters that he was portraying in the movies were slightly more vivid, full of life than his actual life. And this is when he decided to take a step back to kind of get in better tune with himself. And he went back through the 35 years of notes that he had made during his life. And then he went away, spent 2 months in solitude in the desert, and came out with this book. Matthew took those notes and those journal entries and basically distilled them down into this book where he talks about a lot of the life lessons that he's learned over the time and his prescription moving forward in his own life, as well as to anybody reading the book. Matthew talks about how his 20s and 30s are decades where he survived, whereas his 40s was a decade where he thrived. And this is because during his earlier years, he was much more concerned about running red lights than catching green lights. He was careful to not misstep, not gain or acquire any fatal character flaws, and basically navigate his way into fame very much conservatively. That's actually what he calls it. He calls his earlier decades conservative and his last decade liberal. And in his last decade, he was basically able to really pursue the roles that he wanted to do, that he felt were his true essence. And that is when he's done some of his best work. A couple of quotes that he ends the book off on that I found very valuable are the following. So rather than struggle against time and waste it, let's dance with time and redeem it. Because we don't live longer when we try not to die. We live longer when we're too busy living. And the final quote that I really enjoyed this book for is, can we live in a way where we're looking forward to looking back? A good summation of the entire book is leave a legacy. Live your life in the present as you would if you were 80 years old and you were proud to see what you did throughout your life. This sort of long-term thinking is something that I think is a good prescription to anybody making major life decisions, as well as it allows you to get grounded and stay firm in your convictions when making those decisions. Overall, this is a book that I plan on rereading for sure. Things that I didn't mention in the book are there's lots of bits of comedy. Matthew's actually a really good writer. Clearly, all the years of journaling had paid off to something. It's written in such a way that there's short stories everywhere. The book is a massive collection of short stories, so it's a lot of fun to cycle through and read. I don't know how my presentation came off. I just decided to talk about some of the more important parts of the book, when in reality, it's written in these super, super short chapters that are very bite-sized, very easy to digest, and he's hopping sometimes from one situation to another situation, which makes it a lot of fun to read and very palatable. I hope that you guys are able to pick this book up as soon as possible. With the holidays coming up, it would probably make a good gift as well. I very highly recommend this book. I'm not just saying that because I'm a nice guy. I haven't roasted a book on this book review yet, just because I don't think that it's something, I don't know, why spread negativity? I'd rather talk about the books I actually like than the ones I don't like. So anyways, I think this was probably a contender for one of the best books I read this year. I'm not saying that lightly. I think that anybody that picks this book up will thoroughly enjoy it and will always be able to go back, find bits and pieces that they value the most, reread them, and reacquire that value as if it was new. I would absolutely love to hear what you guys thought about the book. If you guys have read it, if you guys have any questions about it, I'd be very happy to answer. Please leave a comment. We can talk about it. I'd be very excited to see that. Thank you. To wrap up, I hope you guys have an amazing holiday season this year. Hopefully 2021 is a nicer year to us than 2020. And until later, thanks for watching. Take it easy.